Hey, everybody. Welcome to Destination Angler Podcast. Today we're headed to the land every fly angler dreams of. That's right, the South Island of New Zealand. Is that right, Tony? We're going to talk about the South
Well,
Island today.
well, yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that everybody does it. But yeah, no, New Zealand's become over the last 40 years a focus for serious anglers,
Sure has.
and we're happy for that. I mean, New Zealand relies a lot on tourism, and tourist anglers bring a lot of good money to New Zealand to help us out. So
You'll welcome anglers in New Zealand. How about that?
absolutely, yep,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, anyway, so New Zealand's known for big trout that'll really test you. You know, you may think you're a great angler. Now, this is me talking. I've never been there, but from what I hear, you gotta be pretty much on your game to do well here. Clear, cold water, warm, friendly people. I traveled the summer when I got out of college with a bunch of people from New Zealand. They're the kindest people I've ever met.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, well, we often say the same about the folks from the US when we're visiting there. So it's always good that Kiwis are behaving themselves when you're here.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
except for that guy that hit Rory McIlroy's wife with a bottle or something at the
Ah,
tournament.
yeah. Well,
That wasn't very good.
golfers. I was a golfer, and I can understand the emotion sometimes. But yeah,
Yeah,
that was a little
not
bit off.
good.
I have to
Didn't
say
didn't
that.
reflect well on Americans. But
No, it
anyway,
didn't.
my as we get into this, Tony, you hear all these wonderful things about New Zealand, and New Zealand's been on the roadmap for fairly long time now. And my question is, has the fishing diminished over the years, or is it still world class? So we're going to get into that today. So we're going to take a trip down under to this legendary island, New Zealand. So welcome to the show, Tony.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Tony's born and raised in New Zealand. And he started trout fishing when he was 7 years old. And I believe he caught his first trout on a worm. Is that right, Tony?
Yeah, exactly. That was kind of the way that boys started, and yeah, fly fishing was a noble concept, but I hadn't heard of it then. And all the boys that in the little town that I grew up in, Geraldine, they all had fishing rods and they all migrated to the rivers. And the fisheries people would bulldoze a bit of the river bed and
Huh.
create a large pond. The river would still throw through it, and they'd throw a few trout in there, and we'd race down there and we'd catch as many as we could.
Oh,
And yeah, so back in my day, getting a rod and going fishing was kind of one of those things that boys did. It's a bit like growing up with rugby.
huh.
Fly fishing came afterwards. My dad was he realised when I was never going to come home again that he couldn't just confiscate the rod. He did it for a while and realised that wasn't that great. So he took up fly fishing with a teaching friend, and then I
Yeah.
would go out with him, and slowly over a period of about 2 or 3 years, graduated into fly fishing and never
Yeah.
looked back. It's I will
Yeah.
fish anyway, um, as opposed to not fishing at all. But 99.9% of it outside of the sea is fly fishing. So
Yeah. How
mm,
about that? All right. And okay, here's what I read about you. You did a stint as a statistics clerk for Shell Oil, then university and secondary school teacher, and you started your guiding business way back in 1980. Wow.
1980, yep. And there were very few of us around then. It seemed like a good thing to do. It had been sort of a dream for a friend and I at university to get into the tourist guiding business. We were thinking more about hunting in those days, but as it
Yeah.
turned out, trout fishing was the low hanging fruit, and that's where a lot of interest was.
Huh.
And it was an easier platform to get into.
Yeah.
And
What
before
hunting?
long, I
Hunting
did
what?
guide hunting as well, but before
Yeah.
long, the trout fishing took over, and I was employing people, so we had to get things right.
Yeah.
And and yeah,
Got it
so
going.
I went
So what
down
were you
the
what were you hunting?
chamois, which is the little Austrian antelope. Looks a little bit like a pronghorn,
Oh yeah.
but it's darker black. There's one up there on the wall. You can see the face. See the
Yeah.
face in the corner up here,
There we go.
and and then some red deer as well. But
Oh, cool. How
the
about
hunters came to get the chamois.
how, what
Mm.
about American elk? I hear you got a lot of elk in New Zealand.
Yeah, well, not a lot of elk. So New Zealand has a lot of red deer, and
Mm-hmm.
red deer is the European cousin
Ah.
of the American elk, same genus, different species. But we did have Roosevelt elk introduced into New Zealand, just
Yeah.
happened to put them in the hardest place to get at down in Fiordland. Not big numbers, but in their heyday, some pretty good trophies.
Man, how about that? I tell you, here in
But they do
Indianapolis.
farm them. I was watching the Alex Waller podcast too, and you're talking about
Yeah, we
finding elk
were.
in American supermarkets.
Yeah,
So
you're
that's
right.
been
The
that's
elk
been
I buy
farmed
here.
on domestic farms, not wild.
Well,
Yeah,
they say the New Zealand people are their best supplier, and it's a meat shop here in Indianapolis. Go figure.
good,
Anyway,
good.
so Tony, he's a former president of the New Zealand Professional Fishing Guides Association, was a founding member of the New Zealand fly fishing team, which won several world championships. Congratulations. He's a
No, we didn't. No, to correct you there, Steve. Sorry, I wish we had. We only ever
Oh,
won one, and I wasn't actually in that team. But in my time, the best we managed was a bronze medal. But we were really happy with that because
ah,
we were neophytes in the competition world in those days.
okay. Well, congratulations. Bronze is pretty good.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
No, we were happy with that.
you're an active conservationist, lobbied for the protection of New Zealand's special fisheries for most of your adult life. Also, one of the early pioneers of heli-fishing. I want to hear about that. And for over 30 years was a regular contributor, writing articles on fly fishing in New Zealand and several trade magazines and books. And now, alas, Tony is retired.
Yep,
So the fishing
and
world
loving
is
and loving it.
and loving it. Yeah, every day's a Saturday, right?
Yeah, yeah, it really is. Yeah.
But you got this little company, Fly Fishing with Tony. It's a fly fishing school, right? And lucky for us, you're willing to share your knowledge about this magical country called New Zealand.
No, a pleasure to do so. You know, the fishing school is, as I say, keeps me out of mischief, and it's a way of putting back to New Zealand anglers. You know, there's a degree of guilt when you're a commercial operator in New Zealand. You know, guiding is a different scene to what it is in the United States. We're dealing with the foreign market principally, and most of our anglers come from overseas, so that's relies on them sharing the fishing with New Zealand anglers. And so, to a
Yeah.
degree, at times, New Zealand anglers over the years have missed out.
Huh.
And so, I mean, and with guiding, it's kind of a privilege to be out there all the time and
Yeah.
learning. And you probably live a lifetime's worth of fishing or more each season, and you do that for 42 and a half years. There's a lot of intellectual property in there that I quite
Yeah.
enjoy sharing with New Zealand anglers who want to get better
Huh.
and and make the most of their New Zealand fishery. So
Do you share some of your intellectual property on guiding with some of the New Zealand guides? Do you do that at
yeah,
all?
well, some of the young ones, if I'm approached, I'm very happy. I mean,
Huh.
as you're probably well aware, guides are kind of independent people, and
Yeah.
we think we know it all anyhow. So influencing other guides is a almost an oxymoron. But yeah, there are young guides out there who come to me and ask me how they can get started and what they need to do. And
So,
so yeah, I'm happy to share what I know.
all right. Now, Jack Dennis, where I got your name, was interviewing Jack Dennis, folks, and that was just a couple of shows ago. We did a show in Tasmania. No idea that Jack Dennis, he was one of the early pioneers, I guess, of getting people to New Zealand. And he said that you were the best guide he's ever been with. And I'm going to totally embarrass you and ask you,
It
what do you
does it
think?
well.
You're allowed to be a little prideful right now and tell us, why do
Absolutely.
you think he would say that? Like, what do you know?
Well, I was lucky, and there weren't too many people in New Zealand to be compared with at the time.
Ah,
And but you know, we hit it off. We made a TV show with Larry Schönborn, Fishing the West,
hmm,
and it came across pretty well. Jack and I sort of talk the same language. I was helping to develop the industry, as we all were. Anybody who was in the game in those early days, we weren't just there to guide because it wasn't much of an industry. We were having to find ways to develop it, and
huh,
so Jack was into that. That's why he got brought on board by the New Zealand government and Air New Zealand to help, and then that led to the same thing in Tasmania. They could see we were doing pretty well. They wanted to do better,
huh.
so they got Jack involved, and we would run into each other. I stayed with him. It was a great adventure. We were sharing an adventure together, so I'm privileged that Jack thought that I was any good. He could have kicked me out early on. He
But he
didn't.
did
He
not.
brought me some wonderful customers, and as a result of that, my guiding journey and the people that I met all the way through. Yeah, no, so
Yeah.
I honour Jack more than he should honour me. I mean, he really was.
Yeah.
He was he is a pretty amazing guy because he's still guiding well
A little
after
bit.
I've retired. He's still in
Yeah, a
it.
little bit.
Mm.
So, all right. Well, let's. I want to come back to guiding a little bit later, but let's just start with talk about New Zealand. Why is this such a world-renowned destination for fly anglers?
Well, it has one serious advantage for American anglers. It's the off season.
Ah,
And so we're not competing, with the Missouri or whatever,
yeah,
Jackson Hole through the height of summer. So
yeah.
that's a start. That is a key. But when you get here, a small country, state of California, I guess, is similar length, and
Hmm.
but in that short distance, relatively for Americans, it changes every hour. So huge variety.
Hmm.
And we're blessed, and the central North Island has its volcanoes and spectacular beach scenery. And down here we've got the high mountains, the Southern Alps that run the length of the South Island. It's
Huh.
kind of rugged. It's got a little bit of a Rocky Mountain feel in places.
Huh.
A little bit of a Colorado feel when you get into Canterbury. So there's degrees of familiarity, but enough that's vastly different. And
Huh.
Americans just love it. Everybody tries to do New Zealand in 10 days. You can't do New Zealand in a lifetime, even if you live here. So
Huh.
to keep it in perspective, there's huge variety, huge number of rivers. There is
Huh.
nobody in New Zealand who's fished all the rivers.
Really? Huh.
I've had friends who've started out to say that they've fished on every river and gone a long way through it, but never ever made it to the end.
Yeah. There's always more. Yeah, are
Yeah,
there any secrets left in New Zealand?
yes, there has to be, but they're secret, and I
Okay.
don't know them. So if I don't know them, they're a secret. But no, really, the largest part of the fisheries are now well understood and pretty well known.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one way to put it is in my day, the anglers came and they relied on you to take them to the fishing and were pretty relaxed. And you were a
Yeah.
good guide if you could show them stuff that they'd never seen before. Now you're a good guide if you take people to all the best fisheries. So
Ah,
that's a comment. He was a great guide. He took me to all the best fisheries. Well,
right.
in that statement, the angler already knew what the best fisheries were.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that's pretty much
Huh.
public knowledge. And so, unfortunately, when that becomes public knowledge, they get heavily hit, and in reality, aren't always the best fisheries anymore. They're just the
Right.
most well-known and popular fisheries.
So what did
So
you
there's
start
been that
doing?
sort of change over
Yeah.
40 years.
What did you
So,
do as a guide as these spots became more and more well known?
yeah, yeah. I mean,
What?
in the early days, it was pretty slow because we used to refer to the map, and you'd see a map laid out on the seat of a rental car, and if you peered through the window, you'd see a bright red line, and it would be the exact beat that you had taken somebody to 2 years before. And you'd only ever taken one person to that beat, and here it was marked on a
And
map.
he's back. The guy's back fishing it
No,
on his
he's
own.
told his mate. He's told his mate.
Oh.
And so the dreaded map, but now you don't need a dreaded map because everybody's got Google Earth, which is
Yeah.
wonderful, and it gives you a relatively recent view of the river so you can see the changes. And
Yeah.
then you've got social media, and everybody's
Mm-hmm.
out competing everybody to be the biggest, to be the best, and have a
Yeah.
social media profile. So people give away the information too easily.
Yeah. Well,
However, as the fishing gets slightly harder, a guide gets more valuable. That's the irony of
yeah.
it. New Zealand fishing is sufficiently different to what anglers in the US um, usually confronted with. So,
Huh.
it is a big adjustment to come here and fish,
Say
regardless
more
of what
about
you
that.
know.
Like how so? What's the adjustment?
Well, we have clear water. Not that we have a mortgage on it. There's other clear water in the world, but our fish average about 23 inches, 22 to 23 inches, around about 4 pound, and a lot of them are brown trout. Um, so they, just by the nature of the beast anywhere in the world, are a little more challenging to approach. So that's our mainstay in this district, for instance, is there's very few rainbow trout. And so people are coming and concentrating on brown trout, and they don't have those skills. A guide's very useful when you're only here for 10 to 20 days, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Wow.
it's
Huh.
a guide has a big role to fill for visiting anglers still.
Yeah. I'll say. So, why are there such big trout in New Zealand? What's going on with your rivers?
Well, the average size at 4 pound, you hear a lot about the giant trout, and they are the exception to the rule. So, you know, in
Huh.
my guiding career, around about 200 double digit fish, as we call anything over a 10 pounder, over all those years. But for the same time, we're talking about 12,000 fish landed. Um, so New Zealand's not a volume fishery. You know, a big day is 20 trout. We've had days when we've caught more, but
Yeah.
average would be 4 to 6 fish, depending on
Okay.
the fishery, and they'll be averaging about 4 pound. So
Huh.
we'll get them from small, which we don't sort of count, through to the bigger fish, but the average will still work out at around about a 4 pound trout.
4 pound trout. Huh.
And that's because the water is clear, good bug life, not intense hatches like you get at times in the United States.
Right.
But our growing season in the river, the growing season is all winter, when they don't have their life compressed into, 4 to 5 months of peak feeding time and then have to overwinter. Our fish can feed and grow most of the winter.
Ah.
So,
Okay.
and brown trout space themselves out. They're not a schooling, unless they're small, they don't
Yeah.
school and they space themselves out, and they get the best of the feeding. And then another thing I think that governs it, our rivers are pretty wild in the main. We have some spring creeks and things like that, but a lot of the famous rivers drain mountain drainages, and New Zealand's a set of islands in the westerly airflow, in the roaring 40s, so we get a lot of rain. And
Huh.
if you think of your Oregon situation,
Oh.
the
Yeah.
west coast is getting 70 to 300 inches of rain in a year. That means floods. It's quite intense at times, and so trout have to be fit and strong to survive. They've adapted,
Yeah.
and that's all those things add up to trout being a little bit bigger, but
Hmm.
fewer of them.
Yeah. Now, how come? That's another thing I keep hearing about New Zealand is that there may be one targetable fish in a pool. That's it, and you may have to walk a long way to find another one. Is that true?
Yes, there are fisheries like that, and some of
Hmm.
the trophy fisheries are like that because they're headwater fisheries. So there's not so much food in the very headwater fisheries.
Hmm.
That's not always true. That's a generalisation. But in the ones you're talking about where you have to walk big miles between fish, um, they tend to be carryover from spawning. A large number of them are males, and some of them are quite old.
Yeah.
So every year, fresh fish arrive running up the river from the lower areas to repopulate some of those headwaters,
Huh.
and then they'll drift out again, um, through the late winter, early spring, and then early summer they'll start to run again. Not running like sea run trout in South America, but
Yeah.
continuously moving up the rivers and repopulating it. So it's
Huh.
a pretty interesting fishery.
Very much.
Canterbury area, yes, you could walk a kilometre between fish, but we could go across to the Motueka River, and we're dealing with several hundred fish per mile again. Never
Oh, yeah.
thousands,
Huh.
never
Okay.
thousands, but several hundred fish per mile. Again, with the Mataura River, which is famous in Southland, several hundred fish per mile. Um,
Okay.
And then the North Island rivers through the winter, but that's not a time the Americans come particularly. We get runs of steelhead, really rainbow trout moving up out of Lake Taupo, and they can be quite intense. And you could see 100 plus fish in a pool, no trouble at all.
Really?
Yeah.
So you may have better steelhead fishing than we do here in the States, at least out west.
Ours are much smaller. These are lake-bound ones, so they will be, 1.5 to 4 pounds, 6 pound gets big, but there's 10 pounders caught every year, as there always is in any fishery. Cool. So you've probably got better steelhead runs coming out of Lake Michigan than
we
have. Yeah, it's a similar sort of fishery, I think.
So tell me about when and how did the trout arrive in New Zealand? I'm assuming it's a British thing. Is that right?
It's a very British thing. Only to prove that God couldn't make things perfect, the British came to New Zealand and found there were no trout in the rivers, so they brought them here to create one of the best trout fisheries in the world. I read that once, that was where the British gave God a hand to make New Zealand almost perfect. So
almost perfect. So did you ever look into how in the world you bring a trout from wherever they're getting them in England all the way around the other side of the world back in the late 1800s? When did this happen?
It was in the 1860s, the late
1860s.
Yeah.
So this is months and months on a ship.
That's when the brown trout came. Well, first of all, you have to thank Tasmania again. So New Zealand and Tasmania are slightly linked in our roots. And the British had managed to transport trout over in cold moss, chilled, wet, damp sphagnum moss, kept them alive long enough on a sailing ship to get them to Tasmania. And there's this famous hatchery in Tasmania still going. Wonderful place to visit. And that's where they raised the first batch of brown trout. And then our eggs came from Tasmania to New Zealand. And then we even repopulated then from New Zealand back to Victoria in Australia. So there was this whole acclimatization movement around the world at that time. It started in France, and it was seen as a conservation move to diversify biofauna in other parts of the world, which would be totally frowned upon today, introduced species, invasive species, but it was seen as a conservation measure. And acclimatization societies were the people who first brought trout to New Zealand, and they were very successful.
I just can't imagine the conversations back then when travel was just so slim. How long did it take to sail to New Zealand? 9 months, maybe? I don't know.
I think it was more like 6 months, but
6 months.
But it's a long time.
Yeah.
But it involved not just ordinary guys. It involved the prime ministers of the day, and it was seen as a way to get sportsmen to New Zealand and create a tourist industry. So it was, in that regard, very modern thinking.
Pretty enterprising. So can you kind of break the country down into what are the major sections that anglers should be considering? And like I've got my list off the internet of all the major rivers. Can you talk about a couple of them?
Okay. So when I first got into guiding, it was the central North Island around Taupo, Rotorua that was the most famous area in New Zealand. That goes back to American Western author Zane Grey, and he'd been bought out by the New Zealand Tourist Department because we had some pretty big fish and some pretty good fishing up in Taupo, and they wanted to expose it to the world. And so they paid Zane Grey to come and write about it. And Angler's Eldorado was the book, and that was famous in getting New Zealand first seen. So you've still got the central North Island. It's a different fishery to the South Island, quite different, but it's still a fantastic place to go, and good numbers of fish. Not probably. You get bigger numbers of fish per day up there on a lot of the rivers than we do in this particular area of New Zealand. But still great fishing and still some trophies. So central North Island, Turangi, Rotorua is the lake fishing. So a lot of the early tourist fishing was on lakes, and that is actually a big volume, but that's not appealing to your audience particularly. So the fly fishing. It then moved down to around the Queenstown area, which was also a government tourist focus. and that was another area that was already going when I got into the industry.
And that's the North Island still?
No, that's now the bottom end of the South Island.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah, so those are still two of the most popular areas, the Turangi Taupo area and the Queenstown area in Southland. And then as we got the industry going, I'd looked around the South Island for a place to start up on the west coast or around Wanaka, or eventually came back up to Nelson area where my wife, who I'd met at university, was from, and realised there was nobody really doing anything up here, and there was some great fishing. And so you've added the Nelson area. North Canterbury has been very popular with trophy trout fisheries. We sort of broke into that area. A few guides came out of Christchurch into that area. And then over time, the West Coast, we developed the helicopter fishing into the upper West Coast. And Dick Fraser, who was at Cedar Lodge down south in the Makarora Valley, he helicoptered a lot to the West Coast at the bottom end. And then it just kind of snowballed. And what we found was in between, there's a huge number of fisheries that are quite popular or quite suitable for visiting anglers. Slowly but surely, the Mackenzie Basin came online. And now that you've got the canal fishing down there, which is kind of artificial but still pretty interesting.
Canals,
yeah. There's big hydro canals that have trophy trout up to 40 odd pound in them. So
what?
If you can put up with the lack of character in the stream, some of it's like a big
straight canals.
No, they weave a little bit, but pretty straight. They curve rather than weave. So
can you get in those? Is it private property? Can you get in these canals?
Some of it's private property, but most of it's a lot of access. Really? And so there are salmon farms, freshwater salmon farms on these canals, and they feed, and obviously there's a lot of extra feed, and the big browns come in and feed on that and get bigger and bigger, and big rainbows. So I think the record's 42, 43 pound now, something like that.
Jeez.
So you wouldn't see those in our local rivers. That's dreaming. So yeah.
What are they eating in canals? Are they eating mice and stuff like that?
No, eating a lot of snails, a lot of freshwater invertebrates, but also they chomp on every free pellet that gets through the nets, or any of the juvenile fingerlings that get discarded. So there's huge food source there.
Okay.
Completely artificial, but kind of interesting.
So interesting. All right. And then where else would you take us? What other parts of the island?
Well, that covers the South Island. The North Island, there are some areas around the margins of the Taupo area that have become a little bit more popular, but still mostly fished out of that Turangi, Tai-Happy area in the central North Island. But then there are other fisheries around the North Island, not quite as popular. They wouldn't handle any pressure, but the travelling angler who's willing to ride around, if they look at the New Zealand Professional Fishing Guides Association website, that will list the regions. About the only region in New Zealand that doesn't have any trout fishing of note is the very top of the North Island.
Okay.
Where there are no trout streams.
Tony, tell me about your first time in a helicopter doing this heli-fishing.
The very first trip in a helicopter was with my buddy Graham Marshall when we were starting our first guiding business here. And Graham was a great adventurer, and he had already hiked into the Karamea country. He said, you got to come and see the fishing. It's just amazing. So we would hitch a ride in those days with a venison recovery helicopter. There were a lot of deer in the hills, and the helicopters were either shooting those deer and exporting them to Germany for the venison, or they were capturing them with nets and putting them behind high fences to start the deer farming industry. So we caught a ride with the local venison recovery guy. That was no doors on the helicopter. Throw your packs in the back, sit on your packs for a seat, and hold on tight, because there were no seats either. And so we whizzed up over the mountains and got dropped off. and the helicopter pilot says, "See ya," and you hope that in 3 days' time he's actually remembered that he's dropped you in there, and he comes and picks you up. So we weren't guiding, but that was my first adventure, and he did come and pick us up.
Yeah.
But it was a serious consideration, because I know of people who did a similar thing and got dropped off and then had to walk out, which would be several days of hard hiking, because the helicopter never came back, just forgot that they'd done it.
They go hunt down that chopper pilot and say, "Dude,
Yeah,
you
so
left me
then
out there."
we realized there was a product there, beautiful scenery,
Yeah.
you could catch 20 trout in a day,
Big ones too,
averaging
right?
5 pound,
Yeah.
and a lot on dry flies. So we got the helicopter pilot to put the doors on, clean the blood out of the helicopter, and we started taking people over the hills. It was pretty hard to convince people, So in those days, a day's guiding was about 250 New Zealand, and a helicopter flight was about 800 New Zealand, which was 400 US. If you divide that by 2, it was 50 cents in the dollar in those days. And people would go, "Well, is it going to be that much better?" And we would say, "Yes, of course." It was an adventure. And we were often going to places that we'd never been before in the early days. Clients would then get excited and say, "Well, shit, if it's this good here, we'll go somewhere else." And we would say, "Okay, we could go there." And they'd say, "What's it like?" We've got no idea, never been there before.
Never been.
Let's go. And so we slowly but surely we developed the backcountry.
Wow.
And it wasn't like it was completely unknown that there were trout back there. There were just no guides, and there was no regular flow of anglers. And we kind of broke it up into bits that were manageable, and made beats out of it. And the guiding industry then in the backcountry was born. Yeah.
Yeah. Were you able to? It sounds like you were able to cast a fish that maybe had never seen a fly, never been fished,
or very rarely. Yeah, there were certainly places that, I was part of a group of, there were about 4 of us who were just starting at the same time to get into the backcountry in this part of the world. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't a solo effort or anything like that. But we eventually would find little corners that, if they'd had an angler in there, they'd only ever had 1 or 2. Maybe it was an American geologist who was in doing some work for the mineral exploration cruise or something like that. And they'd seen trout from the helicopter, and so we'd go back in there and do it. Or I'd learn from a deer hunter or someone like that. "Oh, you should go into that area. I've seen big trout in there."
Yeah.
And so we'd go and have a look, and sure, there'd be some big trout in there, and we'd have a go. Interestingly, not all the streams were easy to catch the fish on. There were some of the streams that had bigger fish in them, the 8 to 10 pounders. And those fish, even if they'd never seen a fly before, were always very difficult to approach. And that goes back over 40 years. So,
no kidding. Has it gotten even harder to approach a big fish like that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, if there's a big fish river that has a few big fish in it, then there are no secrets anymore. And unfortunately, the industry's put too much focus on the very biggest of the fish, the absolute cream. And anglers also, because they're competing on social media, I think, don't want to be seen with just all the average fish. The average fish, the 4 and 5 and 6 pounders, may still be bigger than anything they've ever caught before.
Oh, for sure.
We do see a trend where anglers are coming to us and saying, "I only want to chase the trophy trout." And that's really not the New Zealand deal. So it's got a little bit corrupted over time.
Yeah.
And
what do you tell a guy who says, you've probably had some clients who've said that to you. What do you tell them?
Well, I tell them they have to earn their spurs. That, if you can't handle a fish of 4 pound, if you've never hooked and played trout of 4 pound in fast water before, then you're just going to get creamed. Yeah. And that's pretty much the standard thing that happens for a few days, is people don't hook any trout, then they hook some trout, and then they lose some trout, and slowly they get control. So if you can't handle a 4 pounder, how are you going to handle a 10 pounder?
Yeah.
And so I encourage people to earn their spurs, and we used to kind of keep it as the cream on the cake rather than the main focus. Yeah. So we'd develop people's skills through the week, and then we'd go for a big fish on the Friday, if you like.
Yeah.
and sometimes we succeed, sometimes we'd fail
Huh.
because, as I said, 200 out of 12,000 plus is it's not a high strike rate.
So 12,000. The 12,000 is what? The number of
The
fish
number of
or what?
trout I landed over 40 years, well, clients landed with me, and
12,000.
yeah, so
Wow.
you know
Okay.
about maybe more, maybe 500 a season. So for 40 years, 20,000 trout, but still only 200 double-digit fish in all that time.
200. Wow.
And I
That's
say
amazing.
only because some people would claim they could catch more, but that's a lot of double-digit fish to get into over time. So
Yeah. What's your personal best?
13 and a quarter pound, I like to claim, in a small
13.
stream that runs into a Nelson Lake, and caught on a size 16 pheasant tail nymph
Huh.
for a dry fly, and took about 20 minutes to land on
Yeah.
5x tippet. So
Man, how'd you get
mm,
them in on 5X?
this is the point I made before. You've got to learn to play them. So yeah, I've had plenty of experience of playing and losing. I've lost
Sure.
quite a few too, and nobody ever gets to the point where they cast and hook and catch every fish.
Yeah, not like that.
Nobody's that lucky. That's
Mm,
not skill at that point. It's luck. So, and
yeah.
this one I was very lucky. He had plenty of opportunities to snag me under a bank, and the hook stuck, and then
Yeah.
we were able to roll them into the shallows and net them. So that was a highlight.
Uh,
That's
give me one tip on fighting a big fish. What's yeah.
well, you're not going to win with strength.
Win
So
what?
you're not going to win using strength. If you think that it
Strength.
requires strength, often to get those best fish, they're pretty wary. So you don't have the luxury of using 3x tippet all the time. We would if we could, but sometimes we're way down on 4, 5, 4.5, 5x, and you're not always. So say you're steelhead fishing, you're often using a streamer, and you've got you know, a, a size 8, size 6 hook,
Yeah.
reasonable gape, and you might be on 12 to 15 pound tippet. Here we're on a size 16, 14 nymph, and 5x tippet. So you learn to use the river, the flow of the river,
Huh.
and the mass of the fish. You just, if he wants to pull, you let
You
him
let them
pull,
go.
and you develop what I call soft hands. So you take your time and you turn the fish's head, and you tend to start playing them downstream, and you keep moving them in little semicircles, and you go around them, and then they go around, and eventually
Really?
you'll bring them into the bank. And very often I've looked for a shallow area with a bit of flow, so I can get the fish moving, and then you walk the dog. You walk at a slight angle and moving away, and that fish uses his own power, and then eventually strands himself in the shallows, and the
Oh,
guide's
really?
job is to be there and net him. So
You beach them.
mm,
Huh.
so
Interesting. So
that's one way to do it, but it doesn't always work out. That we've had fish that we've had to travel from one side of the river to the next, and have taken us over a kilometre because they've been big enough to just do what they want to do. So
if they get downstream of you, is that a big
you
problem?
you will struggle to bring them back up,
Yeah.
because then they've got the mass of the water
Sure.
working with them. They've got their own mass, and everything exceeds the breaking strain of the tippet.
Yeah.
Um, if you can keep a good bend in the rod and never
Yeah.
tip your rod towards the fish, you've got a good chance. You keep that big rubber band in there. So, yep,
Yeah.
it's a process. There's no just stripping him in and holding it up and going, wow, on to the next.
Huh. All right. So coming off camera just for a second, Tony, you sent me these couple of stories, and I was gonna kind of try to tee a couple of these up.
Yep,
So you had the guy with no backing on his reel. So
yep,
I might ask you, what's the dumbest thing a client's ever done? A story about your son when he was 7. That's good. I might ask you about that.
yeah.
Your epic day. Um, your older client was great. Anyway, so how about if I just kind of ask you some questions about that, and you can kind of
Yep,
get into some of these things? Okay.
yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So all right. So Tony, all these years of guiding, What's the dumbest thing you've seen a client do?
Well, yeah, no, I won't blame the client for this. So it was in the very early days of guiding, and very little was known about New Zealand, and we didn't know what to advise clients. There weren't these great lists of what you have to bring.
Yeah.
It was the early days of working with Rotorua Lodge, and one of their first clients came in, and he'd been into his little fly shop in Pennsylvania and said, I'm going to New Zealand and I need a brand new fly line on my reel. And the guy said, okay, we can do that for you. And so how often on a Pennsylvania trout stream do you ever see the backing?
Not very often.
Probably not very often, and most of the fish will not exceed 15 inches.
Yeah.
So he comes to New Zealand, and we're out on the river, on the Buller River, which is a pretty wild river. It was the river that really started all the guiding in this area.
Huh.
And the guy gets set to cast to his first fish, and we look at the reel and go, pretty small reel, little Orvis CFO, one of the little.
Oh my gosh, with no drag, right?
With no drag on it. And
Yeah.
we said, Jesus, how much backing have you got on this? You know? And he says, what's backing? We said, well, you know, it's that fine line that gets in behind. So if the trout runs longer than the length of the line, I've never had a trout run longer than the length of the line. So anyhow, so we get in behind a 5-pounder, and he puts a beautiful cast up with his dry fly, and the trout takes the fish, and he sets the hook, and away it goes. It was a beautiful bright yellow line, which we cringed at. We liked brown lines in those days, so the trout couldn't see them. And you said, well, we're going to find out how much backing you've got now. So the little CFO makes that lovely zzz sound, and it's racing up the river. Zzz.
Quiet.
And here's this yellow line snaking off up the Buller, never to be seen again.
You never got it.
Very first cast in New Zealand, he hooks the trout, and there was no backing, and the fly line wasn't even attached to the reel. It was just wound on.
You weren't expecting that. You thought at least he's tied the fly line to the reel.
Yeah, we would have thought somehow it would have been secured. So here's this poor guy going, well, I took it into the fly shop. I just figured they knew what they were doing. We couldn't blame him. So we had to go back to the car and get one of our reels out so that he can keep fishing. But we learned after that you've kind of got to explain everything in detail.
Yeah.
We just weren't used to trout that would pull you regularly out into the backing.
That's funny. Now, you've got some kids, right? Some sons, is that right?
Yeah, 3 boys. Yeah, all grown up there, and multiple granddaughters now, which is wonderful.
Did you get them into fly fishing? They've had some good days with
your kids? No, none yet. So they're all a bit young for that. But we've got a family license, and the girls are registered on it. So when they come to visit, we can start taking them out. So
all right. What about your kids, Drew? You've taken them fishing, I'm sure.
Yeah. They've all had a crack at it, and they've all landed a trout by the time they were 3, and they've all learned how to fly cast. My eldest son, he's the keenest.
Okay.
And number 2 son is getting back into it, but Nick is he's the main fly fisherman. So we just had the opening weekend of the season, and every year I get together with him and some of his buddies, and
nice.
We go and look at some streams. But Nick's pretty proficient fly fisherman.
So there's a story you referenced in your notes to me about he was Nick heli-fishing.
Yeah, no, Nick was blessed to be right in the heart of that growing period of the industry, and was confident young fellow at 7 years old. He caught his first trout on a fly rod when he was 6. So Jack Dennis is over, and he's got Skip Brittenham there, and Skip's being guided by my business partner at the time. And Jack says to Skip, well, we need to cadge a ride. So we hop in the helicopter as well, and Skip had invited Nick to come along because it's easy to squeeze a 7-year-old. So here's Jack and I and Nick dropped into a famous Northwest Nelson River at the time, a small stream, and we've been left to our devices while Skip gets guided. And we had a fantastic day, and we landed around about 30 trout. The best of them were 6 and 7 pound. And Nick very confident at that stage, hooks and lands a 6-pounder in the company of Jack Dennis, and promptly turns to Jack and says, "You know, Jack, I only catch 6-pounders."
A 7-year-old kid came up with that.
And that was about his fifth trout of his life at that stage, and all of them had been 6-pound. It was actually the truth. So
That's
he
funny.
did.
Yeah,
But yeah,
true.
that was an amazing adventure for a 7-year-old to be helicoptering with Jack Dennis
I'll say.
in the New Zealand backcountry.
Huh. Yeah. When you and I talked a couple of weeks ago, you told me a story about a guy who got a little upset about not catching enough fish, went back to the lodge, was complaining about you or something. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, there's always going to be somebody who would do that. We had a situation where an angler came in and he had obviously quite successful. He fished the San Juan River back in its heyday, and
In the
his first
States.
in the States, yeah,
Yeah.
and he made the statement the first night that he 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 averaged 17 fish per day. And I couldn't sort of look him in the eye and say, well, you're screwed in New Zealand. So I said, okay, well, that'll be a bit tough to keep up with. And we got out on the river the next day, and he just disappeared. He said, you look after my buddy, and I'm going to go off because I know what I'm doing. Well, he came back, and he hadn't caught a trout, and he hadn't seen a trout, and was pretty disappointed. And in the end, we came to a parting of the ways. He wasn't going to listen to being guided. So that was one of those difficult things. You've got to be very careful because I told that story in a book, and the guy read the book and put two and two together. And then I was at a speaking tour and talking at a fishing store in Western Rivers Anglers in Salt Lake City. And I look up and here's this guy. And he came up to me and he apologized and he said, look, I probably was a bit of an ass and a bit full of myself. I'm coming back to New Zealand. Would you guide me?
No way.
And I said, yeah, sure. And with a little trepidation, but he came back and he was wonderful and he listened and we caught some really good fish.
That's great.
7.5 pounds. So it had a way of working out. But I try not to tell those difficult stories out of school. I mean, I rather suspect it's quite a few years ago now. So
yeah,
given my age, he's probably moved on too now. So
well, you've probably had some wonderful clients, more wonderful than not, I'm guessing, over the years.
That's the wonderful thing with fly fishing, and generally is the people that you meet were fantastic. And in the end, in guiding, when you add it all up, it's not just the fishing, it's the people you meet and you get to work with that keeps you going, really.
Yeah.
You're going to be in guiding long term. It's not just the fish catching. It's more to do with the people and the interaction with the people. Yeah.
How did your family end up in New Zealand?
That's a good story, really. So my mother's side of the family, Canterbury was settled. The famous first 4 ships came, and so it was a planned settlement from England. There was a New Zealand company. People were chosen based on their jobs or their money or what they were going to contribute. And my great grandfather, I guess it is, was the first doctor in Canterbury. And so on the mother's side, we came that long ago. On her that was on her mother's side. On her father's side, they came from Sweden via Finland. Originally a Swedish family, emigrated to Finland and then came to New Zealand in the late 1890s. We're 1840s on mum's side. And then my dad's side of the family, they came after the First World War. There was a lot of migration from Britain to New Zealand. So dad's father was a coal miner originally, and his mum was Scottish. So got a kind of a mix. And, you look at the world these days and everybody's talking about the evils of immigration. Well, New Zealand would never have got underway if we hadn't had total immigration.
Can you imagine the conversation into, honey, let's move to New Zealand?
Yep.
Where's New Zealand?
Yeah, exactly. No, well, in those days, though, we used to advertise for for people to come because we were short of skills and all the rest of it, you know. And
Okay.
we have the situation in New Zealand with the native Maori population, you know, the indigenous people, and of course they would have watched all this with horror and
Yeah.
the colonisation of New Zealand. So that's another debate in New Zealand that's ongoing.
Yeah.
It's not as confrontational as it is in other parts of the world, but it's a serious conversation, and New Zealand continues to address it. Sometimes we do some good stuff, other times not such good stuff. But I think, in comparison to many other countries in the world, we are at least addressing the issues that the indigenous people have got. So
Doing okay there. What was your life like growing up? Obviously, you went fishing. We heard about that, but what was it like as a kid?
it's a pretty easy care life. I mean, we'd hop on our bikes at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning if we weren't playing sport, and Mum would say, "Well, don't get into any mischief, and we'll see you at before dinner. So don't be late for dinner." And we'd go off and entertain ourselves. Played a lot of sport. You know, sport's big in New Zealand, like the United States. So I was encouraged to play cricket and rugby and hockey. You know, field hockey, and a little bit of soccer. But eventually, I settled on cricket and golf. So I was a lousy batsman, but a very good bowler, and I was pretty handy golfer, and actually thought at one stage that I might become a professional golfer. But as anybody who's been on the river with me, occasionally there's a meltdown. There has to be, and I'd melt down a little too regularly to be a good golfer. And there were no sports psychologists in those days. So.
Too many tangles, huh?
But we had a lot of freedom in New Zealand. Those freedoms have changed substantially, like the rest of the world.
Freedoms, what do you mean?
And it's a little bit hard for me to get my head around the reliance on devices, you know.
Okay.
Whereas we just couldn't wait to get outside and go find something to do, you know.
I'm with you. So did your mom really have to call the local police to chase you home from dinner?
That's true. Yep. Yeah. We would head down to the river, and not always fishing. We'd be getting up to all sorts of other boy mischief that was pretty innocent, and then we wouldn't go home for dinner. And in those days, you know, we were pretty close to the centre of town. There's a river ran through the centre of Geraldine. We were always there somewhere. Yeah. And Mum would ring the policeman of the day, and he would say, "Oh, sure, Joyce, I can hear the little so-and-so's over there in the riverbed. I'll stir them up." So he'd come over to the river. "Come on, boys, get home. Your mother's rung me after. I don't want to see you here any longer." And away he'd go home. So this is sort of all around the time we were 7 to 9 years old, but did get chased home by the policeman.
How about that?
You know, as you know, you can get lost on a stream. One more bend, one more bend, one more bend.
Sure.
And,
well, you're doing what you love. You know? Are you related to John Entwistle, the Who bass player?
I'd like to claim it. I've got my guitar in the background here,
I saw that.
And I don't play it anywhere near as well. But probably distantly, there's a lot of Entwistles in Lancashire, and that's where he came from. So it's a very common name over there. And
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. So not quite as common as Smith, but it's common enough. Yeah. So maybe way back. Yeah. It's spelt the same way, so there's a good chance somewhere on the tree we're related. Yeah.
All right. I want to go back to guiding. We started talking about this a little earlier. So I'm curious, how did you hone your craft, and at what point did you think, you know, something, I think I could be pretty good at this?
Yeah. Okay. So I had this idea with a friend at university we'd get into the guiding, so that started it. And then I decided I needed to get a job, if I could, with some sort of guiding company. And another friend of mine had worked at a high country sheep station called Lilybank Station. Now, it wasn't specifically a fishing lodge, but it was a hunting lodge. And had two mentors there, Gary Joel and Ron Spanton. They were the in charge. And they had very clear ideas of how a professional guide would conduct themselves. So I got a job on the farm. I was never a guide up there.
Hmm.
But Gary did start a fishing school for boys, and I got to be the instructor there. But they had very clear ideas on how a professional guide would operate. You wouldn't have a rod yourself. You wouldn't fish in front of the customers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Clean vehicle every day. For every new customer was greeted with a clean vehicle. How to structure a day, how to focus on making an adventure. It's a holiday for people after all. It's not
Yeah.
just going catching fish. So guided fishing and recreational fishing, to mutually exclusive operations that happen in the same place with the same equipment and the same language and are completely different things. And so once you realize that and how to focus on your customer, so I had that sort of background, and I'd have big discussions with Gary. So he was my first mentor like that in guiding. And then of course I met Jack Dennis, and he had heaps of tips. I was very lucky to meet Howard West before Jack, and Howard was president of Scientific Anglers 3M. And when he learned that I had an interest in statistics, he said, you got to keep some records, and you got to tell people about this fishery. People like a little bit of detail and data. So he was the first person to encourage me to look at keeping records. And because New Zealand was new, I remember Jack talking about, Lefty Cray had just come. I never got to meet Lefty Cray. He stayed pretty much in the North Island or down with Dick Fraser. But I did meet people like Gary Borger, and Gary's very scientific and considered approach was a great help, and his encouragement and his book. His little book, Nymphing, a basic book. There's a section in there on shotgunning and strike indicators. For instance, that cracked the code on the buller for us. And I was just at that time lucky to meet quite a lot of people who had some advice. There was a guide from Livingston, Montana, Don Williams, who came over with one of our early customers who just loved hopping in a helicopter and going, and especially to somewhere we'd never been before. A guy called Bob Solomon, but Donnie was a good guide in Livingston, one of the established guides, and he gave me advice like, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Make sure you have 40% new business each year if you can. Always be bringing new people through, so that you've got some rollover, and lots of sage advice. And
did you find if clients are coming down there for 10 or 20 days, that's a lot of guiding with one client. Is that always a good idea?
No, not with me. Stories against myself. I was pretty good for 7 days.
You guys got to get out of here.
I learned to max out. I've got one client who comes with 10, and he's probably
10 days.
Yeah, he still comes. My last client, if you like. He's come for so long, I'm not going to say no. But and he's probably ready to kill me at the end of 10 days. But there was a sweet spot for me at 6 days. But I've got guide friends who get booked up for a month. And,
a month with the same guy?
Yeah. And one guy who does a guy for 2 months a year, or used to, until he died. But then when people go, that leaves a huge gap, and people aren't used to looking for you at that time of year. So there's a trap in it. But there are people, there are good guides out there who are possibly a little gentler than I am at times. And,
is that right? Did you have to,
fishing can get intense at times.
Is that right? When you got?
Oh yeah.
when you so did you have to work on your languaging, like how you said things to people so that they understood what you're trying to get them to do?
It took a lot to speak a lot slower than Kiwis are used to. So we tend to speak at a speed that's a lot faster than Americans are used to.
Really?
And,
is that right?
And we have a lot of sayings that Americans just can't get their head around.
Give me one of them.
Yeah. Oh, they're usually kind of rude, but you say sidewalk and we say footpath. We say toilet and you say bathroom.
All right.
We'll call it a flannel and you'll call it a face cloth.
A face cloth.
Yeah.
Okay, like a towel.
Yeah. So and if we're drunk, we're pissed.
Yeah, I've heard that.
But if you're
Yeah, I remember
angry,
that one.
but if
Huh?
you're angry, we don't use that term for being angry.
That's not angry.
Yeah.
That's
So
you. Yeah,
so
I
it's
can.
there were lots of funny things there. So we were
Yeah.
separated by a common language for a while, but often anglers would come to me and say, "Oh, where are you from? You're not from New Zealand?" And I'd say, "Yes, I am." And they'd say, "No, you don't sound like a New Zealander to me."
Really?
And I'd sort of found this way of speaking and an accent that was intermediate, and
Oh, really?
that did help a
Huh.
lot. I learned to phrase things differently for Americans, and
What did you want clients to walk away with at the end of 6 days of fishing with you?
well,
What was your
the
goal?
idea was it was their holiday,
Yeah.
and so I wanted them to experience our fishery, and obviously to have had a good time and to have been successful. Um, and so, in an ideal 5 to 6 day slot, I would show them a river. We'd have a river like the Buller where you could go out and get fish on a regular basis, and that's often where their first fish would be. They would learn the difficulties of landing fish. So then,
Yeah.
and it's quite a big river, and then we'd choose to go to a smaller, more intimate river. We've got rivers that throw through farms and rivers that flow through native bush. So we'd show them the open country, the bush country. We'd go to a
Oh, cool.
mountain river, and we'd try and find a mix of dry fly and nymph. I mean, most of
Yeah.
our fishing, really, most of our fish catching relies on using nymphs, but in a way different to what Americans do. So a little bit more like
Huh.
dry fly underwater, I call it, with a small strike indicator and a very short distance, maybe 4 feet to the fly, and
Dry
and
fly underwater. So sunken
you're
dry fly.
still throwing a nymph upstream, dead drifting it, watching the
Okay.
strike indicator as if it's the dry fly, watching it get pulled under, setting the
Yeah.
hook. And that was
Huh.
not commonly done when I started. A lot of that came out of Gary Borger's book, and we
Yeah.
modified the system obviously, and
Huh.
got rid of the little floats that he used and used wool instead. So it took a while to adapt people to that, but we'd try and show them the whole gamut, and we'd try and get them a number of fish, a day where they got 10 fish, maybe between two
Yeah.
and 4 pound. We'd always like to get them at least a 6 pounder through the week, and then if they were up to it, we'd often say, "Look, would you like to try and catch a really big fish?"
You really okay.
But if
Yeah.
they weren't the sort of people who could stand a blank day, because if you
Ah.
start chasing trophy trout,
You
the
might.
odds were you're going to have a blank day rather than a good day.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
they weren't those sort of people, we'd say no, you don't. You should stick to catching
What kind of a person
four,
can't
four to
stand a
six
blank?
pounders.
Huh?
And so so we tried to show them the whole range. And if I felt like their New Zealand fishing skills had got better and better through the week, then I felt like I was achieving something on their behalf. And we were
Okay.
pretty lucky. We didn't have many blank days. In
Yeah.
the old days, we'd say 3 in 100 are going to be blank. And often that was a combination of bad weather, bad luck,
Sure.
and an angler who was not particularly adept. If somebody had reasonable casting skills, we generally will get them fish.
How important is casting skills today?
Good. Yeah, no, it's absolutely crucial. In my part of the world, it's what I call presentation fishing. So you're
Yeah.
not just always working the water. We're stalking in the main, which is not the way we always fish ourselves, but visiting Americans love this concept of hunting up the river. There's a
Hmm.
trout. Now position ourselves. Now
Yeah.
make the right cast. The problem is when you've seen a fish, it's really hard to take your eye off it, and you don't want to pile everything onto the fish. You kind of got to see the fish, put it
Yeah.
out of your mind, and say, I got to put the fly up there and do that. And then there's a whole lot of routines and skills. So quite different to
Huh.
fishing out of a boat. I often wondered why my Americans would do what I affectionately call the American false cast. They'd see a
Yeah.
fish would be 25 feet away. They'd stand there in the water, and the first thing they'd do is go,
Like
and there'd
pull a
be
bunch of line out?
and there'd be 60 feet of line lying at
Oh.
your feet, and you go, "What are you doing?" And they said, "I'm just going to throw up to that trout." I said, "Well, what do you need 60 feet of line to cast 25 feet?" Well, it's
Yeah.
just what I do. They don't think about it. And when I hop in a boat, first thing you do is you strip it off, lay it out on the casting deck, and then you're short and you're long, but it doesn't require the same precision. So good casting skills are essential in New Zealand, and then I always figure that I can modify somebody's technique pretty quickly so that they are effective at putting the fly in the right place in front of the fish. And so accuracy is more of a game here in our fishery than distance, whereas often in American situations I'm watching people outside of spring creeks. Everybody casts probably 25 to 30% further than I recommend. I'd rather stalk and be precise and limit the number of casts.
You want to get closer to the fish?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, how often are you risking the fish seeing you if you get?
Oh, the fish knows you're there. So if somebody walks into the room behind you, you will be aware that they are there. It's just what animals do. So when we approach trout, it's whether they've accepted us or not. Now, if they're used to people coming from the same place at the same time of day and they're under pressure, they'll get pretty testy and they might be difficult to approach. And so, but often it doesn't matter whether you're 30 yards behind them or 30 feet behind them, they would have spooked anyhow. So if they accept your presence and you move in quietly and carefully, you don't have to get down on your hands and knees or anything. You just have to move quietly. You can actually position yourself quite close to fish and much closer than people believe. So we work on those skills and then making the early casts count. So you want to get your fly in front of the fish on somewhere in the first 3 casts, give it a good chance to take it, because after that, it's almost an exponential decay. We've caught fish that we've worked on for an hour and 100 casts, but most of the fish that you actually get, it's actually the first time the fly goes past them effectively. And you don't want to take 20 casts to get an effective cast. We've got to learn to be precise reasonably quickly. Almost, I mean, the sort of skills that you would need on the Henry's Fork, where you just can't stand there and make endless casts. And I've never fished the Henry's Fork. It's on my bucket list, but it's the same. It's the nearest I can visualize in the stories that I get told of the same challenge as New Zealand fishery. It's not always that tough in New Zealand. You know, New Zealand's got a reputation for being really tough.
Right.
It's not always that tough. Otherwise, people might not do this. I mean, we still have days when we have free rising fish or fish nymphing like crazy, and we can get 10 fish in an hour or something like that. It happens.
You've had days, Wow. What are the trout eating? If there's not a lot of hatches, what are they going after?
Well, there's a lot of invertebrate insects, freshwater invertebrates. So we have the mayflies. The principal is the caddis, which is no different to any other trout stream. Most fish are feeding mostly on caddis. And we have stoneflies. They're just not as big as a salmon fly, but they're reasonably big flies. And then a lot of terrestrials. So when it's windy, we have cicadas, which is kind of almost the equivalent of our salmon fly hatch, except it's not a hatch, it's a fall. So there's a range of terrestrials as well. So we do get hatches. We do get some lovely mayfly hatches. Nothing as intense as a trico hatch, or I think it was the Baetis hatch at the end of in September, late September, early October on the Missouri, when things just went white. We don't get that intensity of hatch.
Right.
But we get some pretty good hatches by the same token.
I was going to say, when there's clouds of bugs, why would they take your fly? That's always the challenge, I think.
Yeah, well, I think when there's clouds of bugs, you've got to be even more precise, because the window that the trout has. So you either got to get a lot of luck. I did learn on the Missouri River with my friend Garrett Munson there one day. If you just put it out there and floated it through a patch of rising trout, it'd just get bumped away. You had to actually say, rightio, pick one fish and look at it and target it as close to the nose as in the ring of the rise. It suddenly becomes very, very relevant. So we use elements of that sort of accuracy, but we use it almost all the time.
In your rig, you were talking about a short a small indicator and a short section to that fly and a sinking dry fly. What other rigs are you using?
Oh, yeah, no. So not a sinking dry fly. No, when I say dry fly underwater, the concept of casting up and dead drifting your dry fly back
Yeah,
down.
yeah.
Instead of seeing it as a dry fly, it's an indicator with a
Okay, just a
weighted nymph
style of fishing.
underneath it. Yeah.
Okay, it's a
So
nymph.
so
Okay, I got
we
you.
use a lot of weighted nymphs. I know I put a little collection out here. So I mean, if we this is my I'll put that one up for the camera. It's
Okay.
probably all out of focus, but this is a sort of a caddis
Huh,
variant type pattern.
yeah.
Um,
You have to send
and
me pictures of
then
those.
this is a big fly for this part of the world. This is a green stone fly,
Yeah, look at that. Okay.
and but a lot of the time, this is my most common caddis nymph. It's a little bead head, copper bead head, and you can barely
Okay.
see it. Little size 16. So I would use that
Huh,
most of the time. Those are the
okay.
sort of nymphs that we use.
Huh.
But for
And you,
dry flies, pretty much the American game. Once I started guiding Americans, we used to have traditional New Zealand patterns, which was split ring upright flies of the British model. But
uh-huh.
once we learned about Adams and Parachute Adams and Royal Wolves and the whole Wolf series, in fact, and and some of the bigger the Western flies, the humpies and what have you. That was a game changer. We had more
Huh,
durable flies that floated better in fast water. So uh,
really?
the dry fly fishing, the flies that we would use in the main are very, very familiar to Americans. And we
Huh.
use emergers quite a lot on some hatches.
What are,
And but it's the nymphs that are the hard thing for people to learn.
huh.
Um, we
Uh,
use
are,
nymphs are a more specialist deal, and if I was coming to New Zealand as an angler, I would rely heavily on my guide for the nymphs until you learned what was working, and then you could go to a local fly store and buy something that was similar. But just bring
okay.
your normal dry fly mix. We use
So
anything
the
from
nymphs are
18,
nymphs.
18s through to 18s through to 10s, a few
Oh,
eights in
okay.
dry flies. So.
Yeah.
mm.
I mean, can you talk about the seasons? What time of year is the best and what goes on in your different seasons?
Yeah, best is always a risk in New Zealand. We don't have the stable climate that you get in the continental US. So October is the start of our season. We've just started. It's been a really
Huh.
tough start to the season. If you're here now, you're dealing with high coloured water,
Uh,
not from snow melt, just from a lot of rain.
yeah.
Um, Very difficult access even around the small streams because you can't cross, and it's still quite cool. So and overcast, but that'll pass, and the river levels will drop. You come into November, and we're starting to get one of our best mayfly hatches is a fly called a coliboriscus, which is very similar to a green drake when you look at it.
Yeah.
And so we've got a green drake hatch going to go on, and we'll get some good rising fish, but still catch most of our fish on nymphs. By middle of December, it's warmed up quite substantially, and the river levels have dropped quite substantially. And so that's a good time of year, but the hatches are a little bit more diffident. They're more early in the day or late in the day, morning and evening, because through the day it's getting a bit hot for the mayflies to hatch.
Yeah.
And then you get into January, February, early March, and that's when a lot of visitors like to come because it's theoretically the most stable weather, but we get cyclones down here that,
Uh,
as the Australians would say, would blow the milk out of your tea. So you can have really big bad floods at any time of year in New Zealand.
huh.
And but if it is very fine, then the rivers will drop. The fish will get very testing. The water's very clear, and it gets much harder to approach the fish. So often when
Yeah.
people come to New Zealand, they come at the best time of the year for the weather, one of the tougher times of year to catch the fish.
Because you're so
And then we
crystal
catch a
clear.
lucky break and the cicadas hatch. And when the
What?
trout get on cicadas, they can get a little suicidal for a while. And so that saves the day in February on a lot of
Huh.
rivers. We have fish taking big dry flies. Um, But
That's fun.
it's not a bulk fishing thing. That's a time of year when you're going to have to move between fish and it's a little more uncertain. But
Yeah.
but the big fish have started to show up at that time of year too. So there is the occasional really big fish thrown in amongst
Huh.
these other fish.
So these big fish are moving. You say
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
showing up, so they're moving.
The best of the big fish are the young ones, and they're moving from the lower areas of the rivers, the estuarine areas of the rivers,
Huh.
where the temperature is quite equitable. They've grown up eating bait fish and stuff like that, so they tend to have a lot of condition on them.
Huh.
You hear a lot about the year of the mouse, and people are
Yep.
always hanging out for mice fish. So I can tell you that in my life, I've only ever really caught a couple of fish on mice, the biggest of which was 3 pound. The other was a
Huh.
2 pounder. So it didn't catch many big fish. It was spectacular take. Yes, the
Yeah.
trout feed a lot on mice, usually at night,
Uh-huh.
but we catch a lot of our mice fish on small nymphs, right down to size 16. It's just one of the ironies.
Yeah.
But you do get some of them on the big cicadas through the day, and they'll come up and take cicada patterns
Yeah.
through the day.
Yeah.
Stuff that looks like oops, daisy. You're rubber-legged things
Okay,
like this.
folks.
So
There we go.
it's not what a cicada looks like, but it's how a cicada it works for a cicada. So
Okay.
excuse me, I just dropped something on the floor. So
Ah,
that's an appealing time of year for Americans to come. And then
yeah.
late season, a little bit like your fall, it's not quite as distinctly cold, but when we start losing the leaves off the trees, we get back into a couple of good smaller mayfly hatches in the middle of the day. The fishing tends to be more from 11:30 through to about 4 o'clock,
Okay.
and but shorter days. It starts to get colder, and most of our visiting American friends, anyhow, have gone by the middle of April. And then
Okay.
here, the season closes at the end of April. Further south, the season will go through to the end of May because they get some good hatches down
A little warmer down there.
there. So, no, not so much
Well,
warmer, just a different twilight. Yeah,
yeah.
different twilight,
Um,
a bit cooler, if
well, as
you.
we're closing up here, Tony, I'm curious,
Mm-hmm.
what's your favorite shore lunch?
Well, when you come with us, it's usually a sandwich, a piece of fruit, and a drink, and gone.
Is that
So
right?
we don't put much of a focus on shore lunches. In the early days, I used to occasionally kill a trout and put it in the smoker, and we'd have that. But
Yeah.
most of my clients, when we get on the river and we're working, usually that middle of the day is when the fish are on the go, and it's pretty hard to tie them even to sit down. I've had the clients who'll grab the sandwich and right, I'm just going to go back fishing.
They want to fish.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's
but
great.
we put more emphasis on the beer at the end of the day and a sit down, and when we have a debrief.
Ah, I was
So
going to say, what's it like at the end of the day when you're fishing? Do you guys go somewhere and have dinner
yeah,
somewhere, or you just kind of?
that happens quite a lot. So at the end of the day, we pull off the waders, we sit there and we have a beer. It's the traditional drinking of the beer ceremony and a bit of a debrief. You don't want to rush off.
Yeah.
Um, on the way back to town, sometimes we've got one. We've been fishing the Motueka River. We'll always call in at the Muteri pub. That goes back to 1840 something. That pub.
Really?
It's really
Cool.
old, and we'll have a beer
Huh.
there. Mostly, I don't do as much, or didn't in the latter years do as much going out to dinner with the clients, but once or twice a week with clients, we'll go to a local Nelson
Yeah.
restaurant if we're based out here. Nelson's got some wonderful restaurants.
Do they?
It's
Okay.
so
All right.
yeah, it's a good life. The customers are
Yeah.
pretty exhausted usually at the end of the day. We've done a lot more walking than they
Huh.
used to. So an easy day might be 2 or 3 miles of walking.
Really? Wow.
A big day might be 12 miles of walking.
And you've got some gradient out there too, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. So and a lot
Okay.
of big boulders, and it's not easy walking. So American anglers who've got used to fishing from a boat, it's a bit of a big deal to acclimatise to walking New
Maybe
Zealand
get
river.
in shape.
Yeah,
Get in
and
shape before
especially
you come out.
for our older anglers, a lot of people
Yeah.
come. That's when they can afford to come to New Zealand, and they find that physically it is a demanding fishery. It doesn't matter where you go in New
Huh.
Zealand. for that. Very
Interesting.
few drift boats in New Zealand. There's a few down around Queenstown now, and a couple in the North Island, but that's not our traditional fishing. It's walk and wade and stalk,
Right.
and you got to bash your way through a bit of forest here and there, and you've got to wade deep, and so it's quite physically demanding.
There you go. Tony, what's the one thing you want people to know about New Zealand?
Well, it's still a great place to come. You know, the fishery has changed as it's matured. It's not as naive as it was. You've got to work on your skills. You know, you'll be 5 and 6 weight lines for most of it, so that's pretty familiar. But you've got to be working on your accuracy skills and patience. You know, you're not coming to a volume fishery. You know, if you're landing 3 to 5 fish a day, you're doing pretty good, but you will have better days than that. And of course, you know, if you're not coming for a long period of time and you're not super experienced, take the time to hire a guide. It's expensive here too. Right now, you're getting a pretty good deal. It's about 57 cents in the dollar. So whatever you see the price as, it's a good deal. But sort yourself out a good guide, and you'll be ahead of the game.
There you go. Tony, thanks for being on the show. Great job.
Oh, pleasure. So nice to meet you, Steve. I enjoyed your artwork too on your website there.
Oh, that's nice of you to say.
Quite a challenge. I've got a buddy. No, you can't really see it. I'll swing it over here. This is for other people, but you can see the trout at the bottom there. I've got a buddy in the North Island, Rob Vaz, and Rob Vaz is a very good fly fisherman, and I think he'd enjoy seeing your art as well. So he adds that dimension, doing the Bob White thing. Yeah.
The Bob. I just interviewed Bob White.
Did you? Oh, God.
I did.
I'd love to meet Bob. We've been much the same vintage all the way through. Never had the opportunity. Always admired his skills and his artwork. I've got one tiny little piece. He did a little drawing for me of Parachute Adams in one of John Garrick's last book. So,
and you got the artwork from that?
I got him to draw a little.
Really?
So that was pretty cool. And
that's really cool.
My friend Brand Oswald in Livingston, in Yellowstone, anyhow. Yeah, so Brand Oswald is a guide on the Nelson Spring Creek. He arranged it all. It was wonderful.
Oh, Nelson's, I did a show with Jackie and Tucker, I think it was. Yeah, nice people. Well, how can people get in touch with you?
I keep a regular contact with there's not as much as it used to be from the States, because nobody's hiring me anymore. I'm not there to hire, but it's nice to keep contact with the States. And so a regular basis. Somebody will go, I wonder what's happened to Tony.
Tony, do you want me to not give out a email or?
No, I don't mind at all. No, it's all there on my website, so it's in the public domain. And if people contact me, I'm happy to help with a little bit of advice. There's a lot of good agents now. You know, that was the thing that we didn't have in the early days. And then you've got a lot of good operators sending people to New Zealand. There's not too many secrets left, and everybody knows what to do. If I can help somebody, then I'm happy to help them. Yeah,
that's nice of you. There you go, folks. What a treat. Give Tony a call if you're planning on coming to New Zealand or thinking about it. And folks, thank you for listening. Tony, I wish you extraordinary success in all your adventures to follow. Hey, and we will post Tony's website on my website, and go on out. He sent me some really fantastic pictures. We'll put those on our Facebook and Instagram page. As always, you can DM me or email me with comments and suggestions at shaig@destinationanglerpodcast.com. If you like the show, please share it with a buddy. As always, our music is by our Brothers Fountain. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you again soon. Tight lines, everybody. All right, let me pause here. Stop.